Hello, everybody. We're back, and we'll try not to bore you so much with our cheesy jokes and witty comments. But we are starting our next section, the biggest section, leading to our favorite World War I and II and everything.
Oh, yeah.
But we're going to focus a little bit on imperialism. And in a few slides, we're going to tell you what imperialism is. But if you take a look at this map, Mr. Loebner, what do you notice about the colors? What do you notice about Africa? What's going on?
Well, it seems to me that Europe has got their grips on the continent, and every part of it, except for a couple countries, will be taken over by these European powers. You can see the British have a strong influence in Northeast Africa as well as Southern Africa. The French are going to dominate Western Africa. The Germans have a strong influence. Even the Belgians.
I was just say, even the little Portuguese have a couple, areas there. And before you know it, these European countries are going to be not only dominating Africa, but trying to dominate the rest of the world.
And the Europeans have an advantage, and that is from the industrialization that occurred. So now they are modernized and weaponized and have high-tech technology, and the Africans are fighting back with spears and bows and arrows, and it's just not going to be a match for the Europeans.
Way outdated. So like you said, industrialization, Europeans wanted more resources and need these new markets. So you're selling goods. If everybody has those goods, then you need to find more people to buy them, or you're going to lose money. So certain leaders, you can see down there, the Belgian king, Leopold, is going to send people into Africa through the Nile River. Dr. David Livingstone, that's a very famous Dr. Livingstone, I presume. He went off searching for the source of the Nile River, and he disappears. A reporter goes to find him, and in that hunt, we learn a little bit more about Africa.
And the Belgians were ruthless. They would send the Africans into the forest to collect rubber, and if they came back with a half-full container, they would chop off their hands as examples to people. They employed them as their slaves, and they got rich off of the exploitation of the Africans. It was a very horrifying scene.
And think about, with slavery, just taking them from their homeland. No, they paid no mind to the fact that they'd been living there first. It didn't matter.
That's a good point. Hundreds of years of slavery was occurring in the 15 and 16 and 1700s, and now to top it off, the Europeans are going to go in there and now physically control Africa.
So imperialism is the takeover, sometimes by force, of a country or territory by a stronger nation. So the stronger nation, we saw on that map of those European countries, we've talked about Great Britain, France, Spain, dominating in Europe, and now they're taking that domination to other places and dominating their political life, so governments, the economy, and then even sometimes the social life of the people. And like you said, almost treating them like slaves in their own country. And how do they do this? The idea of social Darwinism supported their beliefs that as a more superior or advanced society, think about the Enlightenment, they felt that they had the right to go to these weaker countries and take them over.
They believed that it was their right, that they had to spread Christianity, they had to spread their Western ways of government, they believed it was superior, and they were actually doing the Africans a service by taking them over and changing their ways.
This is part of the how Africa actually got the nickname the Dark Continent, because they were uneducated, and the Enlightenment bringing the light to them. They were in the dark.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So the reasons for imperialism. European countries, they don't want to have to trade with each other for raw materials. What if they go to war? Why rely on France if you have a problem with them when you can go into Africa and get the raw materials yourself?
Because they're competing for power.
So they want to be self-sufficient. They want to have new markets for trade so they can continue to make lots of money. They become nationalistic. If I'm in France and I want to be the strongest country in Europe, taking over Africa will make France stronger. So nationalism develops. It's an outlet for the population. People can move into Africa and live there and start a new life there. Opportunity to spread religion. And they believe that it was a burden that they had to help civilize the Africans. These poor white people have a problem. They have to civilize the Africans. So that was another reason.
Yeah. Didn't, was it Australia that became a prison colony?
It was.
For the British? Sorry. Just a little aside there.
Yeah. Fun fact. So the forces enabling imperialism. We have a Maxim gun, which is like a machine gun, and it could fire about 600 bullets per per minute. So you really don't need many soldiers to take over thousands and thousands of
I was
people.
just thinking how we thought everything was revolutionized when it was just the musket, and now things are advancing so quickly.
You have your steam engine, so now you can travel up and down rivers throughout Africa. You're not at the whim of a sail. You can travel wherever you want to. Easier to communicate. You have railroads and telegraph cables and
Talked
steamships.
about Morse code and
Malaria was a killer. What's the little bug that causes that?
a mosquito. So annoying.
Mosquitoes. So now you have quinine, which can cure malaria.
So that like helped them go further into Africa, because a lot of times they just stayed along the coast, but now they could travel deeper inland and be protected.
That's a good point. And they also played the African tribes against each other. The Africans were not united. The Europeans would divide them and force them on each other and weaken them.
Remember we said the enemy of your enemy is your friend.
That's
so
right.
Use them. So the Berlin Conference met in Berlin, and these 14 major European nations are going to set up some rules on how to divide Africa. They want to avoid going into war with each other over these countries. However, there are some issues. They didn't allow any African rulers to attend, which seems, pretty terrible, and considering the fact they're just coming into their country. And they divided the country with no thought of tribal relations, nationalities, religions, rivalries, anything like that. So there's actually a good map in the book, I think, that talks about like the actual different groups, like their borders, and then the borders that these other countries set up. And you could see that like things were divided. So this whole classroom could be one, group, and they could have divided it into 3 random ways, and you would have been separated from family or been grouped with maybe an enemy.
And many of the problems today in the 2000s are a direct link to what the Europeans did when they divided up Africa. If you're familiar with Rwanda, if you've ever seen the movie Hotel Rwanda, it was the Europeans that divided the Rwandan people, and it led to a Holocaust only 20 years ago, where nearly 1 million people died.
Yeah, which is crazy to think about.
So the events
after World War II, yeah.
So the events happening in these times, even though it's the 1800s, it's still important today. All right, we're going to talk about South Africa just as one in-depth example of imperialism, and this is a complex.
Yeah, I was going to say.
There's a lot going on in the history of South Africa. The original people there were the Zulus. The British are going to show up, and also the Dutch will show up, all competing for the Zulu lands. The Dutch settlers were known as is it Boers?
I say Boers.
Yeah, okay. They're going to take over the Zulu land and set up farms there. In the early 1800s, Shaka Zulu, the most famous.
I'm sure you guys have heard of Shaka Zulu.
He had a huge empire, but then the British are going to show up. They're going to push the Zulus out and also push the Boers out. And when the Boers start to move north, this is known as the Great Trek, they're going to be clashing with the Zulus and fighting with them. The Zulus will be defeated by the British in 1879, and just an interesting clash of cultures example. The Zulus defeated the British at one of the early battles.
I was just going to say, they were like, not, it could have been a different story, you know what I mean? It seems like they might have had a chance.
When the Zulus, after they defeated the British, they sliced open their stomachs, and the British looked at that like, oh, these guys are savages. How could they slice open our stomachs? They're savages. But for the Zulu culture, that was a sign of respect. They killed these warriors in battle, and they opened up their stomachs, which allows their spirit to rise up. Oh. So the Zulus were paying respect. The British see it as an act of barbarity, and it just makes the tension even worse.
Like more aggression and everything. Oh, I didn't know that.
And
See, if you don't know somebody's culture or background,
right.
Things could be misinterpreted.
We had the Boer War, fought between the British and the Boers, 1899 to 1902, and this was the first modern total war. The Boers used commando raids. Does that mean they were running around without underwear?
No, but that would have been pretty funny. And the guerrilla tactics, not using monkeys, but the booby traps and hit and run tactics in order to defeat the enemy.
And because the Boers were so effective at attacking the British and then hiding, the British felt that they needed to round up all of the Boer people and put them in reconcentration camps to keep the guerrillas out. And by doing that, people died in large numbers due to disease and malnutrition. And interestingly, at the same time this was happening, America was doing this in the Philippines. rounding up Filipinos and putting them in camps.
They
It
were
was also
torturing them
happening in
pretty
Cuba.
badly too,
Oh,
like
they
drawing,
were.
quartering people, and yeah, it was
The
pretty
water
terrible.
cure.
Yep.
So the British win the war, and the significance of the Boer War is that the British are no longer going to be fighting solo. They're going to look for alliances to protect their empire, and this is going to lead to dun dun dun.
World War One.
Yes.
All
World
right.
War I. All right, so that concludes section 1. It was a long one, but it was a
It was a
good
goodie.
one.